The smell of wood smoke and pine sap hung thick in the mountain air as Ryland Dalton crouched beside the creek, filling his canteens with ice-cold water that tumbled down from the peaks above Butte, Montana, and when he straightened to his full height, muscles rippling beneath his worn buckskin shirt, he caught sight of two figures huddled near a burned-out campfire about 50 yards downstream. It was late September in 1877, and the aspens had already begun their transformation into gold, their leaves trembling in the afternoon breeze that swept down from the high country. Ryland had been trapping in these mountains for the better part of 5 years, ever since he had left civilization behind after the war. At 28 years old, he stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of countless hours, swinging an axe and hauling game through rough terrain. His dark brown hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his weathered face. His arms were corded with muscle, visible even through the leather of his shirt, and his hands were large and calloused from hard work. He watched the two figures for a moment, his hunter's instincts telling him something was wrong with the scene before him. One was clearly a woman, probably in her early 20s, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight even though it was tangled and dirty. The other was younger, maybe 14 or 15, with similar coloring but a thinner frame. They wore dresses that had once been nice but were now torn and stained with travel. The older one was holding something in her hands, and as Ryland moved closer, staying quiet out of habit, he realized she was holding a small piece of hardtack, breaking it carefully into 2 pieces. But instead of eating both pieces, she kept the smaller one for herself and handed the larger piece to the younger girl, who took it with trembling hands. The younger one started to eat immediately, her hunger obvious in every desperate bite, while the older woman just held her smaller piece, watching her companion eat with an expression of such tender concern that it made something twist in Ryland's chest. He stood there for a long moment, partially hidden by the cottonwoods that lined the creek, and watched as the older woman finally took a tiny bite of her hardtack, chewing slowly as if to make it last. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and worry. The younger girl finished her portion quickly and looked at the older woman with guilt written all over her young face. "Tessa, you should have eaten more," the girl said, her voice carrying across the water. "You gave me most of it again." "Hush now, Lily," the woman called Tessa replied, and even from this distance Ryland could hear the warmth in her voice despite her obvious fatigue. "You are still growing. You need it more than I do." "But you have not eaten properly in days," Lily protested, and Ryland could see tears forming in her eyes. "You keep giving me your food. You're going to get sick." "I will be fine," Tessa assured her, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from Lily's face with a gentleness that spoke of deep love. "As long as you are well, I will be fine." Ryland had seen enough. He stepped out from the trees, making sure to make some noise so he would not startle them too badly. Both women jumped to their feet immediately, and Tessa stepped in front of the younger girl protectively, her body language defensive despite her obvious weakness. "Easy there," Ryland said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I did not mean to frighten you ladies. I was just filling my canteens upstream when I noticed you had no fire going." Tessa's eyes were wide and wary, a deep green that reminded him of the forest in summer. She was even prettier up close, despite the dirt and exhaustion, with delicate features and a mouth that looked like it was made for smiling, though it was currently pressed into a tight line of fear and determination. "We are fine, thank you," she said, her voice steady even though he could see her hands shaking. "We do not need any help." Ryland noted the "we" and glanced at the younger girl, who was peering around Tessa's shoulder with wide eyes. "Well, madam, I do not mean to contradict you, but it is going to get mighty cold tonight, being this late in the season and this high up in the mountains. You will want a fire at the very least." "We ran out of matches," Lily said before Tessa could stop her, and Tessa shot her a quick look that was equal parts frustration and resignation. "I see," Ryland said carefully. He could see the remains of their camp now, the cold ashes of a fire that had burned out at least a day ago, a small carpet bag that looked nearly empty, and no supplies to speak of. No bedrolls, no food stores, nothing that suggested these women had any business being out here in the wilderness. "Are you ladies traveling to Butte? The town is about 6 miles northeast of here, down the mountain." "We know where Butte is," Tessa said, still defensive, but losing some of her edge as exhaustion seemed to wash over her. "We are trying to get there. We just had some difficulties on the road." Ryland studied them both carefully, taking in the details. Their dresses, though worn, were of good quality fabric. They spoke well, with education in their voices. But they had no wagon, no horses, and clearly no supplies. Something bad had happened to them, and recently. "May I ask what kind of difficulties?" he ventured, keeping his voice gentle. Tessa hesitated, clearly weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she seemed to decide that she had little choice. "Our wagon broke an axle 3 days ago on the road from Virginia City. The men we were traveling with took the horses and most of the supplies and left us behind. They said we were slowing them down and that they could not afford to wait while repairs were made." Anger flared hot in Ryland's chest. What kind of men would leave 2 women alone in the wilderness? "They just left you." "They were not good men to begin with," Tessa said quietly. "We had paid them for passage to Butte, but once we were away from town, they showed their true nature. We are fortunate they left us at all instead of doing worse." The implication in her words made Ryland's jaw clench. He had known plenty of rough men in his time, especially in the mining towns in the wild country, but he had never understood how some men could abandon basic decency. "Well, they are gone now, and you are here," he said, forcing his voice to remain calm and steady. "And I have supplies enough for 3, a good camp about a mile from here, and plenty of food. I would be honored if you ladies would allow me to help you get to Butte safely." "We cannot pay you," Tessa said immediately, her pride evident even in her weakened state. "Those men took what little money we had left." "I did not ask for payment," Ryland replied. He looked at the younger girl, who was swaying slightly on her feet. "When is the last time either of you had a proper meal?" Tessa's silence was answer enough. Ryland made a decision then, one that would change the course of his life, though he did not know it yet. He shrugged his pack off his shoulders and set it on the ground, opening it to reveal his supplies. He pulled out a bundle of dried venison, a sack of cornmeal, some beans, and a few apples he had traded for at a trading post the week before. "Here," he said, offering an apple to Lily and another to Tessa. "Eat these while I get a fire going. Then I will cook us all a proper supper." Lily reached for the apple eagerly, but Tessa caught her hand, stopping her. "Sir, we cannot take your food. You will need it for yourself." "Madam, I am a trapper and a hunter. I can get more food any time I need it. These mountains are full of game, and I know every creek and valley for 20 miles in any direction. You, on the other hand, are half-starved and trying to take care of your sister." He had guessed at the relationship, but the way both women reacted told him he was right. "Please, let me help you. It is what any decent man would do." Tessa's eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them back rapidly, clearly trying to maintain her composure. "We would be very grateful," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryland nodded and handed them each an apple, watching as Lily bit into hers immediately with a small sound of pleasure. Tessa took a more measured bite, but he could see the relief in her eyes as she tasted real food. While they ate their apples, Ryland set about building a fire. He gathered dry wood from the surrounding area, arranged it properly, and used his flint and steel to get a flame going. Within minutes, he had a good fire crackling, and he set up his cooking pot on a tripod over the flames. He added water from his canteen, some of the dried venison cut into chunks, beans, and a handful of wild onions he had gathered that morning. As the stew began to heat, filling the air with a smell that made both women's stomachs growl audibly, Ryland pulled out his bedroll and spread it near the fire. "You ladies should sit down and rest while this cooks. It will take a little while, but it will be worth the wait." Tessa helped Lily to the bedroll, and they both sank down onto it gratefully. Now that they were closer to the fire and sitting in better light, Ryland could see just how exhausted they really were. Tessa's face was drawn, her lips cracked from dehydration, and her hands were blistered from what looked like days of walking. Lily looked even worse, her young face pale and her eyes dull with fatigue. "How long have you been walking?" Ryland asked as he stirred the pot. 3 days since the wagon broke," Tessa said. "We have been trying to follow the road to Butte, but we had to leave it yesterday when we ran out of water. We came to the creek to refill our canteen, but we only had the one, and it has a crack in it now. We have been losing water faster than we can drink it." Ryland pulled out his spare canteen and handed it to her. "Here, this one is sound. Keep it." "Sir, we cannot keep taking your things," Tessa protested, but he could see the desperate need in her eyes as she looked at the canteen. "You can and you will," Ryland said firmly but kindly. "And my name is Ryland Dalton. I think we are past the point of standing on formality, given that I'm cooking you supper." A small smile flickered across Tessa's face, the first he had seen, and it transformed her features completely. Even tired and dirty as she was beautiful when she smiled. "I am Tessa Livingston, and this is my sister Lily." "Pleased to meet you both, though I wish it were under better circumstances," Ryland said. He checked the stew and added a bit more water. "Where are you ladies from originally?" "Boston," Tessa said, and that explained the quality of their dresses and their educated speech. "Our father died 6 months ago. He had invested in a silver mine near Butte, and we were coming west to see if we could claim his share. We have nothing left back in Boston. Our mother died when Lily was born, and father had no other family." "I am sorry for your loss," Ryland said sincerely. "That is a long way to travel for 2 women alone." "We came by train as far as Virginia City," Tessa explained. "We had enough money for that and for passage to Butte by wagon, but the men we hired took advantage of us." Her voice hardened slightly. "I was foolish to trust them. I should have known better." "You are not foolish for expecting basic human decency," Ryland said firmly. "The fault lies with them, not you." They fell into silence for a while as the stew cooked. Ryland busied himself with camp tasks, checking the fire and making sure his knife was sharp. He could feel Tessa watching him, probably trying to decide if he was trustworthy. He could not blame her for being cautious after what she had been through. Finally, the stew was ready. Ryland had 2 tin plates and 1 bowl, and he filled all 3 generously, handing the plates to Tessa and Lily and keeping the bowl for himself. He also pulled out his last loaf of bread, which was getting a bit stale but was still good enough, and tore it into 3 pieces. Lily ate like she was starving, which she probably was, but Tessa ate more slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a feast at a fine restaurant. Ryland watched them both with satisfaction, pleased to see color coming back into their cheeks as they ate. "This is the best thing I have ever tasted," Lily said between bites, and Tessa nodded in agreement. "It is just trail stew," Ryland said, embarrassed by their gratitude. "Nothing fancy." "It is food, and it is warm, and it is more than we have had in days," Tessa said softly, meeting his eyes across the fire. "Thank you, Ryland, truly. You may have saved our lives." "Well, I could not very well leave you out here to starve," Ryland said, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. There was something about this woman that made his heart beat faster, something beyond her obvious beauty. Maybe it was the way she had been willing to starve herself to feed her sister, or maybe it was the strength he could see in her despite her exhaustion. Whatever it was, he found himself wanting to help her, to protect her, in a way that went beyond simple human kindness. When they had finished eating, Ryland served them both second helpings and then thirds until they finally had to stop because their stomachs could not hold any more. He made sure they drank plenty of water too, knowing they were likely dehydrated from their ordeal. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and pink, Ryland made a decision. "My camp is about a mile from here, up in a hidden valley. I have a good cabin there, sturdy and warm, with proper beds and supplies. I think we should head there for the night rather than sleeping rough here. In the morning, I will take you to Butte." "You have a cabin?" Tessa asked, surprised. "I thought you were a trapper." "I am, but I'm not a nomad," Ryland explained. "I built the cabin 3 years ago as a base camp. It is easier to process furs and store supplies with a permanent structure. Plus, winters up here can kill a man if he does not have proper shelter." "We do not want to impose on you any more than we already have," Tessa said, but he could see the longing in her eyes at the thought of a real bed and a solid roof. "You are not imposing," Ryland assured her. "Come on, we should get moving before it gets full dark. Can you both walk another mile?" "Yes," Tessa said immediately, straightening her spine with determination. Lily nodded too, though she looked exhausted. Ryland packed up his gear quickly and efficiently, putting out the fire and making sure they left no trace. Then he shouldered his pack, picked up his rifle, and gestured for them to follow him. He kept his pace slow, mindful of their exhaustion, and stopped several times to let them rest. The path to his cabin wound through dense forest and over a small ridge before descending into a narrow valley that was invisible from the main trails. It was one of the reasons Ryland had chosen this spot. It was hidden and defensible, with a good creek running through it and plenty of game nearby. As they crested the ridge and started down into the valley, the cabin came into view. It was solidly built of pine logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Next to it was a small barn where Ryland kept his 2 mules and his supplies. Smoke rose from the chimney, which surprised him until he remembered he had banked the fire that morning before leaving. "Oh," Tessa breathed, and he heard the relief in her voice. "It is beautiful." Ryland had never thought of his cabin as beautiful, practical, sturdy, and comfortable. Yes, but not beautiful. But seeing it through her eyes, after days of exposure and fear, he supposed it must look like a palace. He led them inside, lighting the oil lamps that hung from the walls. The interior was simple but well made, with a large fireplace, a table and chairs, a cooking area, and 2 beds built into the walls on opposite sides of the room. There was also a loft above, which Ryland used for storage. The floor was made of smooth planks, and there were animal furs scattered around for warmth and comfort. "The beds are all yours," Ryland said immediately. "I will sleep in the loft. There are blankets in that chest over there, and I will heat some water so you can wash if you would like." "You do not have to give up your beds," Tessa protested weakly, but she was already looking at them with such longing that Ryland nearly laughed. "I insist," he said firmly. "You both need proper rest. Besides, I have slept in worse places than my loft." He set about heating water in the large pot over the fireplace while Tessa and Lily explored the cabin with obvious wonder. He could hear them exclaiming softly over the simple luxuries, the solid walls, the warm fire, the sturdy furniture. It made him realize how much he had taken for granted his own comfort and safety. When the water was hot, he poured it into a basin and set it on the table with some soap and clean rags. "There you go. I will step outside for a bit to give you ladies some privacy." "Thank you," Tessa said, and the gratitude in her voice was so heartfelt that it made his chest tighten. Ryland went outside and sat on the porch, listening to the sounds of the night. The air was cold and crisp, and he could see his breath in the lamplight that spilled from the cabin windows. He thought about the 2 women inside, about how close they had come to disaster, and felt anger rise in him again at the men who had abandoned them. After about half an hour, he heard Tessa call softly from inside. "You can come back in now." He entered to find both women transformed. They had washed their faces and hands and had brushed out their hair as best they could. Lily was already curled up in one of the beds, wrapped in blankets and looking half asleep. Tessa stood near the fire, and Ryland was struck again by her beauty. With the dirt washed away, he could see the fine structure of her face, the intelligence in her green eyes, the graceful line of her neck. "Lily is exhausted," Tessa said softly. "She will be asleep in moments. I cannot thank you enough for everything you have done for us today." "You do not need to keep thanking me," Ryland said, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "Any decent person would do the same." "But not everyone would," Tessa replied. "We have learned that the hard way." She paused, then added, "You asked us to eat, and you fed us both when we had nothing. You made sure we had plenty. I will never forget that kindness." Ryland felt heat rise in his face, unaccustomed to such direct gratitude. "You should get some sleep too. You look dead on your feet." Tessa smiled slightly at his bluntness. "I am exhausted," she admitted. "But I wanted to wait until you came back inside. I did not want to seem rude." "Get some rest," Ryland said gently. "We will talk more in the morning, and I will take you to Butte. You will be safe here tonight." Tessa nodded and moved toward the other bed, but she paused and looked back at him. "Ryland, why are you helping us? You do not know us. We could be anyone." Ryland met her eyes steadily. "I saw you give your food to your sister, even though you were starving yourself. That told me everything I needed to know about what kind of person you are. The world has enough hardness in it. When you can help someone, you should." Tessa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Good men are rarer than I thought." "There are more good people out there than bad," Ryland said. "You just had the misfortune to meet some of the bad ones first." She smiled at him then, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and Ryland felt something shift in his chest. He realized with a start that he was in danger of falling for this woman he had just met. The thought should have scared him, but instead, it felt right somehow, as if this meeting had been meant to happen. "Good night, Ryland," Tessa said softly. Good night, Tessa. She climbed into the bed and pulled the blankets up to her chin, and within minutes her breathing had deepened into sleep. Ryland stood there for a long moment, watching both women sleep by the light of the fire, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in him. He would get them to Butte safely. He would make sure they got what was owed to them from the mine. He would do whatever it took to help them. He climbed up to the loft and spread out his bedroll. But sleep was a long time coming. His mind kept returning to the image of Tessa breaking that hardtack, giving the larger piece to her sister without hesitation. He thought about her determination, her strength, the way she had kept going even when she must have been close to collapse. He thought about her smile and the way her eyes had looked when she thanked him. By the time he finally drifted off to sleep, Ryland knew that his life had changed today. He just did not know yet how much. When Ryland woke the next morning, dawn light was filtering through the small window in the loft. He could hear movement below and the sound of the fire being stoked. He climbed down the ladder to find Tessa already awake, dressed in her worn dress and attempting to make coffee in his pot. "Morning," he said, and she jumped slightly, turning to face him. "Good morning," she replied with a shy smile. "I hope you do not mind. I thought I would try to make myself useful. You have been so kind to us, and I wanted to do something in return." "You do not owe me anything," Ryland said, but he appreciated the gesture. He moved to the fireplace and took over the coffee making, showing her where he kept his supplies. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Tessa admitted. "That bed is wonderfully comfortable, and I felt safe for the first time since we left Virginia City." Lily was still asleep in her bed, her young face peaceful in repose. Ryland was glad she was getting proper rest. As he worked on making breakfast coffee, cornmeal mush, and some of the leftover venison from last night, he was acutely aware of Tessa watching him. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Of course. Why do you live out here alone? Do you not get lonely?" Ryland considered the question as he stirred the pot. "I came out here after the war," he said finally. "I had seen enough of people and civilization for a while. The mountains are peaceful. They do not judge you or ask anything of you except respect. As for lonely, I suppose I am sometimes, but I have gotten used to my own company." "Were you in the war?" Tessa asked softly. "I was. Fought for the Union. Saw things I would rather forget." He did not elaborate, and she seemed to understand that he did not want to talk about it. They ate breakfast together when Lily woke up, and Ryland was pleased to see both women looking much better than they had the day before. Good food and rest had worked wonders. After breakfast, he announced his plan. "I'm going to take you both to Butte today. It is about a 6-hour ride if we take my mules. We will need to leave soon if we want to get there before dark." "Ride?" Lily asked, perking up. "We get to ride instead of walk?" "Yes, you get to ride," Ryland said with a smile. "I have 2 mules. One of you can ride each mule and I will walk alongside." "You should ride too," Tessa protested. "We can walk. You've already done so much." "Those mules can carry 2 people, but not 3, and not with supplies," Ryland explained patiently. "I am used to walking these mountains. It will not bother me." He went out to the barn and brought back his 2 mules, sturdy animals named Buck and Daisy. He saddled them both and helped Lily onto Buck and Tessa onto Daisy. Both women sat somewhat awkwardly, clearly not experienced riders, but the mules were placid and well-trained. Ryland loaded some supplies into saddlebags, extra food, water, and his rifle, and then led them out of the valley and down the mountain toward Butte. The trail was rough in places, but Ryland knew it well, and he guided them safely around the worst spots. As they traveled, Tessa told him more about their situation. Their father, Theodore Livingston, had been a businessman in Boston who had invested in western silver mines. He had died suddenly of a heart ailment, leaving behind debts and very little liquid capital. The mine near Butte was their only asset, but they had no way to verify its value or claim their share without being in Montana. "The mine is called the Silver Star," Tessa explained as Daisy plodded along the trail. "Father had a 25% stake in it. The other partners are 3 men named Carson, McAllister, and Finch. Father always spoke highly of them in his letters, but we have never met them." "I know of the Silver Star," Ryland said thoughtfully. "It is one of the more productive mines around Butte. If your father truly owned a quarter of it, that share would be worth a substantial amount." "That is what we are hoping," Tessa said. "We need to speak to the other partners and show them Father's papers proving his investment. We have those papers in my bag. They are the only thing those men did not take from us." "Did you hide them?" Ryland asked. "I sewed them into the lining of my dress," Tessa admitted. "I did not trust anyone not to steal them." "Smart," Ryland said approvingly. "You were right not to trust those men." They stopped at midday to rest and eat, and Ryland shot a rabbit that had been foolish enough to cross their path. He dressed it quickly and cooked it over a small fire, making sure both women ate their fill. He noticed that Tessa still tried to give Lily more than her share, and he had to gently insist that there was plenty for everyone. "You need to keep your strength up too," he told Tessa firmly. "You cannot take care of your sister if you are half-starved." "I know," Tessa said with a sigh. "It is just habit now. I have been taking care of Lily since our mother died. She was just a baby then, and I was 9 years old. Father tried his best, but he was often away on business, so I became more mother than sister to her." "You have done a good job," Ryland said, glancing at Lily, who was exploring the area around their campsite with youthful energy now that she had been properly fed and rested. "She is a good girl, and she clearly loves you very much." "She's the only family I have left," Tessa said quietly. "I would do anything for her." "I know," Ryland said. "I saw that yesterday when you gave her your food." They reached the outskirts of Butte late in the afternoon. The town was bustling with activity, as it always was. Butte was a mining town, rough and full of hard men who worked the silver mines that honeycombed the hills around it. The main street was lined with saloons, hotels, general stores, and assay offices. The air smelled of smoke and ore processing, and the sound of hammering and shouting filled the air. Tessa looked around with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the chaos after days in the wilderness. Lily clung to her sister's hand as they walked down the main street, Ryland leading the mules beside them. "First thing we need to do is find you ladies a place to stay," Ryland said. "There's a decent hotel on the next block called the Montana House. It is run by a respectable woman named Mrs. Patterson. She will take good care of you." "Ryland, we cannot afford a hotel," Tessa said quietly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "We have no money at all until we can claim our father's share of the mine." Ryland had anticipated this. "I will cover the cost for now. You can pay me back when you get your inheritance." "That could take weeks," Tessa protested. "We cannot let you pay for us that long." "Then it takes weeks," Ryland said with a shrug. "I have money saved up from selling furs. I do not have much use for it up in the mountains. Besides, you need a safe place to stay while you sort out your business with the mine." Before Tessa could argue further, Ryland led them to the Montana House, a 2-story building that was cleaner and quieter than most of the establishments in Butte. Mrs. Patterson, a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes, greeted them at the desk. "Ryland Dalton," she said with pleased surprise. "I have not seen you in town for months. What brings you down from your mountain?" "I found these ladies in need of help," Ryland explained. "They need a room for a while, maybe a few weeks. Can you accommodate them?" Mrs. Patterson looked at Tessa and Lily with shrewd but kind eyes. "Of course. I have a nice room on the second floor with 2 beds. It is quiet and clean, and meals are included in the price." "How much?" Ryland asked. "For you, Ryland, because I know you are good for it, I will charge $2 a week, meals included." It was a fair price, actually quite generous. Ryland nodded and pulled out his money pouch, counting out $8. "Here is a month in advance." "Ryland, no," Tessa said, putting her hand on his arm. "That is too much. We cannot accept it." "You can and you will," Ryland said firmly, echoing his words from the night before. He pressed the money into Mrs. Patterson's hand. "Take good care of them. They have been through a difficult time." "I will," Mrs. Patterson promised. She handed a key to Tessa. "Room 7, at the top of the stairs. There's a washroom at the end of the hall, and supper is at 6 o'clock. Tessa took the key with trembling hands, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "I do not know how to thank you," she whispered to Ryland. "You do not have to thank me," Ryland said gently. "Just promise me you will eat properly and take care of yourself and Lily." "I promise," Tessa said. "Good. Now, tomorrow morning, I will take you to meet the mine partners and help you sort out your claim. For tonight, just rest and recover." "Will you join us for supper?" Tessa asked hopefully. Ryland hesitated. He should probably head back to his cabin. He had traps to check and work to do. But the hopeful look in Tessa's eyes made him nod. "I will be here at 6. He left them to settle in and went to stable his mules at the livery. Then he visited a few shops, buying supplies and trading news with the shopkeepers who knew him. Everyone was surprised to see him in town, and several asked about the two women he had brought with him. Ryland kept his answers vague, not wanting to spread Tessa's business around town. At 6 o'clock sharp, he returned to the Montana house and found Tessa and Lily already in the dining room. They had washed and changed into fresh dresses that Mrs. Patterson must have loaned them, because their own dresses had been too damaged to wear. Tessa's borrowed dress was a simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and her auburn hair was clean and pinned up in a neat style. Ryland's breath caught in his throat when he saw her. She was absolutely beautiful, and when she smiled at him as he approached the table, his heart kicked hard against his ribs. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I said I would," Ryland replied, taking the seat across from her. Lily sat beside her sister, looking much more like the carefree girl she should be now that she had been properly fed and rested. Mrs. Patterson served them a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. It was simple fare, but it was well cooked and filling. Ryland found himself enjoying the meal not because of the food, though it was good, but because of the company. Tessa told stories about growing up in Boston, making both him and Lily laugh with her descriptions of high society and its ridiculous rules. Lily chimed in with her own observations, and Ryland found himself relaxing in a way he had not in years. After dinner, they moved to the hotel's small parlor, where a fire burned in the hearth. Other guests were scattered around the room, but Ryland found a quiet corner where they could talk privately. "Thank you for staying," Tessa said softly, once they were settled. "It is nice to have a friendly face around. This town is a bit overwhelming." "Butte takes some getting used to," Ryland admitted. "It's not like Boston, I imagine." "Not at all," Tessa said with a small laugh. "But I am not afraid of it. I just need to learn how things work here. Tomorrow, when we meet with the mine partners, let me do most of the talking at first," Ryland suggested. "Mining men can be tough to deal with, especially with women. They might try to take advantage of you, but if I am there, they will be more careful." "Do you know these men? Carson, McAllister, and Finch?" Tessa asked. "I know of them," Ryland said carefully. "Carson is the eldest, a shrewd businessman, but generally honest. McAllister is younger, hot-headed, and ambitious. Finch is quiet, keeps to himself. I've had some dealings with them over the years, selling them venison and elk meat for their mining crews. They know me, and they know I am not a man to be trifled with." Tessa looked at him with gratitude, and something else, something warmer that made his pulse quicken. "I am so glad we found you, Ryland. Or that you found us, I suppose." "I am glad too," Ryland said quietly, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They talked for another hour until Lily started yawning and Tessa insisted they should go to bed. Ryland walked them to the stairs and said goodnight, watching as they climbed to the second floor. When Tessa looked back at him from the landing, their eyes met, and Ryland felt that pull again, that sense of rightness that told him his life had irrevocably changed. He left the hotel and walked through the streets of Butte, thinking hard. He had told himself he would help these women get settled and then return to his cabin, to his solitary life in the mountains. But now, after spending more time with Tessa, after seeing her smile and hearing her laugh, after watching the way she cared for her sister with such devotion, he was not sure he could just walk away. He had not felt this way about anyone since before the war, and even then it had never been this strong, this immediate. Tessa was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was strong and kind and intelligent. She had been through hell in the past few days, but she had not given up. She had kept going, kept protecting her sister, kept her dignity even when she was starving. Ryland realized he was falling in love with her, hard and fast, and the thought terrified him. What did he have to offer a woman like Tessa? He was a mountain man, a trapper who lived alone in the wilderness. She was educated, refined, from a completely different world. Once she got her inheritance, she could go anywhere, do anything. Why would she want to stay with someone like him? But then he remembered the way she had looked at him during dinner, the warmth in her eyes, the way she had smiled when he made her laugh. Maybe, just maybe, she felt something too. He decided then and there that he would not run away from this feeling. He would help her sort out her business with the mine, and then he would be honest with her about how he felt. If she did not feel the same way, he would accept it and return to his cabin. But at least he would know he had tried. The next morning, Ryland arrived at the hotel early to find Tessa and Lily already waiting for him in the lobby. Tessa looked nervous, clutching the small bag that contained her father's papers, but she squared her shoulders when she saw him. "Are you ready?" Ryland asked. "As ready as I will ever be," Tessa replied. They left Lily at the hotel under Mrs. Patterson's supervision. There was no need to bring her to what might be a difficult meeting, and walked to the offices of the Silver Star Mining Company. The building was located on a side street, a solid structure of brick and timber with a sign hanging above the door. Inside, a clerk sat at a desk, shuffling papers. He looked up when they entered, his eyes lingering on Tessa in a way that made Ryland's jaw tighten. "We are here to see Carson McAllister and Finch," Ryland said in a tone that brooked no argument. "Tell them Theodore Livingston's daughter is here to discuss his shares in the mine." The clerk's eyes widened. "Livingston's daughter? I will get them right away." He disappeared through a door at the back of the office, and a few minutes later, 3 men emerged. The first was in his late 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face that would be Carson. The second was younger, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes and an impatient air, McAllister. The third was middle-aged, unremarkable in appearance, with a quiet demeanor, Finch. "Miss Livingston," Carson said, stepping forward, "we had no idea Theodore had passed. We are very sorry for your loss. He was a good partner." "Thank you," Tessa said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I'm here to claim his share of the mine on behalf of myself and my sister." Of course," Carson said. "Please, come into the back office and we will discuss this properly." They were led into a larger office with a big desk and several chairs. Ryland stayed close to Tessa, positioning himself slightly behind her chair in a protective stance. The 3 partners sat across from them, and Carson gestured for Tessa to continue. "I have my father's papers here," Tessa said, pulling out the documents she had sewn into her dress. "They prove his investment and his ownership of 25% of the Silver Star mine." Carson took the papers and examined them carefully, then passed them to Finch, who studied them with equal attention. McAllister barely glanced at them, instead watching Tessa with an expression that Ryland did not like. "These papers appear to be in order," Finch said finally. "Theodore Livingston indeed owned a quarter share of the mine." "Which means that share now belongs to you and your sister," Carson added. "However, there are some complications we need to discuss." "What complications?" Ryland asked, his voice hard. McAllister leaned forward. "The mine has been producing well, but we have recently hit a difficult stretch of ore that requires expensive equipment to process. We have been putting all the profits back into operations. There is no cash to distribute at the moment." "How convenient," Ryland said dryly. "Your partner's daughter shows up to claim her inheritance and suddenly there are no profits." "It is not like that," Carson said quickly, shooting McAllister a warning look. "The mine is genuinely going through a capital-intensive phase. However, Miss Livingston is entitled to her share of the mine itself, even if there are no immediate cash distributions." "What does that mean, practically speaking?" Tessa asked. "It means you have several options," Finch explained. "You can hold on to your share and wait for future profits. You can sell your share to us or to another investor. Or you can take an active role in managing the mine, though that would be unusual for a woman." "How much would you pay for my share?" Tessa asked. The 3 men exchanged glances. McAllister spoke first. "Given the current situation, we could offer you $5,000 for your share." Ryland nearly laughed out loud. "5,000? The Silver Star has produced over $50,000 worth of silver in the last year alone. A quarter share is worth at least $15,000, probably closer to 20. "How do you know our production numbers?" McAllister demanded. "Because I talk to your miners when I sell them meat," Ryland said coolly. "They are quite proud of the mine's success. Or they were, until you started this nonsense about expensive equipment." Carson sighed and held up a hand. "All right, enough. Mr. Dalton is correct. 5,000 is insultingly low. Miss Livingston, I will be honest with you. Your father's share is worth approximately $18,000 at current valuation. If you want to sell, we will pay you that amount, though it will take us some time to raise the cash. Alternatively, you can keep your share and receive quarterly distributions once we get past this current phase." "How long will that take?" Tessa asked. 3 to 6 months probably, Finch said. We are installing a new stamp mill that will allow us to process the ore more efficiently. Once that is operational, the mine should be very profitable again. Tessa looked at Ryland, clearly seeking his advice. He leaned down and spoke quietly in her ear. If you need money immediately, take the buyout. But if you can afford to wait, keeping the share will be more valuable in the long run. The mine is genuinely successful, and your quarterly distributions could be substantial. Tessa nodded and turned back to the partners. I will keep my share and wait for the distributions. However, I want regular updates on the mine's operations, and I want to visit the mine itself to see what you are doing. McAllister started to object, but Carson cut him off. That is perfectly reasonable. You are a partner now, Miss Livingston. You have every right to be informed about the business. They spent another hour working out the details. Carson drew up papers confirming Tessa's ownership of her father's share, and all three partners signed them, along with Tessa. Ryland witnessed the signatures, making sure everything was legal and binding. When they finally left the office, Tessa was holding the papers that made her a part owner of a successful silver mine. She looked stunned, as if she could not quite believe what had just happened. Are you all right? Ryland asked as they walked back toward the hotel. I think so, Tessa said slowly. I just became a mine owner. That is not something I ever expected. You handled them well, Ryland said with approval. You did not let them intimidate you, and you did not accept their low offer. That was thanks to you, Tessa said, stopping to look up at him. If you had not been there, they would have taken advantage of me. I know they would have. Maybe, Ryland conceded, but you were the one who made the decisions. I just gave you information. They walked in silence for a moment, and then Tessa said, Ryland, I need to ask you something. What is it? Will you stay in Butte for a while, at least until I get the first distribution from the mine? I need someone I can trust, someone who knows this place and these people. I will pay you for your time, of course. Ryland stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Tessa, you do not need to pay me to stay. If you want me here, I will be here. You would do that? Tessa asked, her eyes searching his face. But what about your cabin, your traps? They will keep, Ryland said. I can check them every few days. It's only a 6-hour ride. And besides, I want to make sure you and Lily are taken care of. Why? Tessa asked softly. Why are you being so kind to us? Ryland looked down at her beautiful green eyes and her soft mouth, and decided to be honest. Because from the moment I saw you giving your food to your sister, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Because you are the strongest, kindest, most fascinating woman I have ever met. Because I think I am falling in love with you, Tessa Livingston, and I do not want to leave you. Tessa's eyes widened, and for a long moment she just stared at him. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, transforming her features into something radiant. Oh, Ryland, I have been hoping you would say something like that. I thought maybe I was imagining the way you looked at me, or that I was foolish for feeling what I feel after knowing you for such a short time. What do you feel? Ryland asked, hardly daring to hope. I feel safe when I'm with you, Tessa said, stepping closer to him. I feel like I can trust you completely. And I feel something more than that, something warm and wonderful that I have never felt before. I think I am falling in love with you too. Ryland felt joy surge through him, so powerful it almost hurt. He reached out and cupped her face gently in his large, calloused hands. May I kiss you? Yes, Tessa breathed. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, softly at first, then with more passion as she responded. She tasted sweet and felt perfect in his arms, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. I have wanted to do that since the moment I met you, Ryland admitted. I'm glad you finally did, Tessa said with a laugh. Then her expression grew more serious. Ryland, I need you to understand something. I have Lily to think about. She comes first, always. I know, Ryland said. I would never ask you to choose between us. I care about Lily too. She's a good kid and she deserves a good life. And I need you to know that I have never done anything like this before, Tessa continued. I've never courted anyone, never kissed anyone until just now. My whole life has been about taking care of Lily and helping my father. I do not know how to be someone's sweetheart. Neither do I, Ryland admitted. but I think we can figure it out together." They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, both of them smiling like fools. When they arrived, Lily took one look at their faces and grinned. "Something good happened," she said immediately. "Many good things happened," Tessa told her sister. "We officially own part of the mine, which means we will have money coming in soon, and Ryland is going to stay in Butte for a while to help us." "Really?" Lily asked, looking at Ryland with delight. "That is wonderful." "I think so too," Ryland said, ruffling her hair in a brotherly gesture that made her giggle. Over the next few weeks, a pattern developed. Ryland would ride up to his cabin every few days to check his traps and maintain his property, but he always returned to Butte to spend time with Tessa and Lily. He took them to visit the mine so Tessa could see the operation firsthand. He introduced them to the honest merchants in town and warned them away from the dishonest ones. He taught Lily how to ride properly on one of his mules, and he courted Tessa with a steady devotion that made her fall more in love with him every day. They took long walks through the hills around Butte, talking about everything and nothing. Ryland told her about his life before the war, about growing up on a farm in Ohio, about the horrors he had seen in battle and how he had come west to escape those memories. Tessa told him about her childhood in Boston, about her father's business dealings, about the weight of responsibility she had carried since her mother's death. "I always thought I would have to take care of Lily alone," Tessa confessed one afternoon as they sat on a hillside overlooking the town. "I never imagined someone would want to share that burden with me." "It is not a burden," Ryland said firmly. "She is your sister, and you love her. That makes her family. And if you and I have a future together, then she is my family too." Tessa leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. "I want that future, Ryland. I want it very much." "So do I," Ryland murmured into her hair. As autumn deepened into early winter, they began to make more concrete plans. The mine started producing profits again, just as Carson had promised, and Tessa received her first quarterly distribution. It was a substantial sum, more money than she had ever seen at one time. She immediately set aside a large portion for Lily's future and used some of it to buy herself and Lily proper clothes and necessities. She also insisted on repaying Ryland for the hotel and all the supplies he had bought them, though he tried to refuse. "You earned that money from trapping," she said firmly. "I will not take advantage of your generosity anymore." "You never took advantage," Ryland argued, but he accepted the repayment when he saw how important it was to her pride. One evening in late November, Ryland asked Tessa to meet him on the hotel porch after Lily had gone to bed. When she came out, wrapped in a warm shawl against the cold, he was standing there looking nervous, which was unusual for him. "Is everything all right?" Tessa asked, concerned. "Everything's fine," Ryland assured her. He took a deep breath. "Tessa, I know we have not known each other very long, only a couple of months, but I know my own heart, and I know what I want. I want you. I want to marry you, to be your husband and Lily's brother. I want to build a life with you." Tessa's heart started pounding. "Ryland." "Wait, let me finish," he said, taking her hands in his. "I know I am not the kind of man you probably imagined marrying. I am rough around the edges, and I live in the wilderness, but I love you with everything I am, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you and Lily are safe and happy and loved. Will you marry me, Tessa?" Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Ryland. I love you too, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it now." Ryland let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around on the porch until she was laughing and crying at the same time. Then he set her down gently and kissed her, a long, tender kiss that promised a lifetime of love and devotion. When they finally pulled apart, Tessa said, "I need to talk to Lily. She needs to agree to this too. If she does not want to leave Butte or live in the mountains, we will need to figure something else out." "Of course," Ryland said. "Her happiness is important to me too." But when they told Lily the next morning, she was overjoyed. "You're going to be my brother?" she asked Ryland, her eyes wide with excitement. "If you will have me," Ryland said. Lily launched herself at him, hugging him tightly. "I would love that. I always wanted a big brother, and you are the best one I could possibly have." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Butte. Mrs. Patterson helped Tessa make a simple but beautiful wedding dress, and Lily stood beside her sister as she promised to love, honor, and cherish Ryland Dalton for the rest of her life. Carson, Finch, and even McAllister attended the ceremony, along with several other townspeople who had become friendly with the Livingston sisters during their time in Butte. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Ryland danced with his new wife, holding her close and marveling at how his life had changed. Just a few months ago, he had been alone in the mountains, content with his solitary existence. Now he had a wife and a sister, and a future full of possibilities. That night, Ryland took Tessa to the cabin he had rented in town for their wedding night, wanting to give them privacy. He was gentle and patient with her, knowing she was nervous. They took their time exploring this new intimacy, learning each other's bodies, and expressing their love in the most profound way possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, talking quietly and making plans for their future. "Hey, I know you love your cabin in the mountains," Tessa said, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingers. "And I do not want you to give it up. But would it be possible to split our time between the cabin and a house in Butte? Lily needs to finish her education, and I need to keep an eye on my share of the mine." "I think that is a perfect solution," Ryland said. "We could stay in Butte during the winter months when the mountains are harsh and spend summers and falls at the cabin. The cabin is a good size. I could add onto it, make it more comfortable for 3 people. And we could get a small house in Butte for the winter months." "You would do that?" Tessa asked, looking up at him. "For you, I would do anything," Ryland said, kissing her forehead. "Besides, I think I could get used to splitting my time. The mountains will always be my home, but you are my home now, too." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Ryland bought a small but sturdy house on the edge of Butte, and they moved in with Lily before the worst of the winter weather hit. He continued to trap and hunt, but he also took on work in town, hauling supplies for the mines and doing odd jobs that needed a strong back and willing hands. Tessa managed her share of the Silver Star carefully, meeting regularly with the other partners and making sure they kept their word about distributions and updates. Lily thrived in their new arrangement. She attended the small school in Butte and made friends with other girls her age. She adored Ryland, often following him around when he was home and listening with rapt attention to his stories about the mountains. He taught her practical skills: how to start a fire, how to track animals, how to move quietly through the forest. Tessa sometimes worried he was teaching her things that were not very ladylike, but she could not deny that Lily was happy and confident in a way she had never been before. As spring approached, they made plans to spend the warmer months at the mountain cabin. Ryland rode up ahead to prepare the place, adding a small room onto the cabin that would serve as a bedroom for Lily. He also built a proper chicken coop and planted a garden, wanting to make the cabin more homelike for his wife and sister. When Tessa and Lily finally made the journey to the cabin in late April, they were amazed at the transformations. The cabin was still rustic, but it was comfortable and welcoming, with curtains on the windows that Ryland had sewn himself, though he was embarrassed to admit it. The garden was beginning to sprout, and the chickens were already laying eggs. "It is perfect," Tessa said, standing on the porch and looking out at the valley. "I can see why you love it here so much." That summer was one of the happiest times of Ryland's life. He taught Tessa and Lily how to fish in the creek, how to identify edible plants, and how to move through the wilderness safely. Tessa proved to be a quick learner, picking up skills that would have taken most city folk months to master. Lily was even more enthusiastic, often ranging far ahead on their walks until Ryland called her back. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset over the mountains. Ryland would play the harmonica he had dug out of his old belongings, and sometimes they would sing together. Tessa had a lovely voice, clear and sweet, and even Lily could carry a tune. One night in early July, as they lay in bed together, Tessa told Ryland she was pregnant. He was overjoyed, wrapping her in his arms and whispering his love and gratitude into her hair. They told Lily the next morning, and she was thrilled at the prospect of becoming an aunt. "Will you teach the baby all the things you taught me?" Lily asked Ryland eagerly. "Of course I will," Ryland promised, "and you can help me. You will be the best aunt any child could ask for." Tessa's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. By the time they returned to Butte for the winter, she was round with child and glowing with health. Ryland fussed over her constantly, making sure she did not overexert herself and that she ate properly. Mrs. Patterson and several other women in town took Tessa under their wing, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1879. Tessa labored through the night with the help of the town midwife, while Ryland paced anxiously in the next room. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife emerged a few minutes later with a smile on her face. "You have a healthy boy, Mr. Dalton, and your wife did beautifully. You can come in now." Ryland entered the bedroom to find Tessa propped up against the pillows, exhausted but smiling, with a tiny bundle in her arms. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and Ryland felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. "He is perfect," Ryland whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny hand. The baby's fingers closed around his thumb with surprising strength. "You are perfect." "We decided to name him Thomas," Tessa said softly, "after your father. You told me once that he was a good man, and I thought you would like that." Ryland's eyes filled with tears. "I would like that very much. Thank you, Tessa." Lily came in a few minutes later, eager to meet her nephew. She perched on the edge of the bed and gazed at baby Thomas with wonder. "He is so small," she breathed. "Can I hold him?" Tessa carefully transferred the baby to Lily's arms, showing her how to support his head. Lily looked down at Thomas with such tenderness that both Ryland and Tessa felt their eyes mist again. "I promise to be the best aunt ever," Lily told the baby solemnly. "I will teach you everything, and I will always protect you." The first few months with a newborn were challenging but joyful. Thomas was a good baby, rarely fussy, and he seemed to thrive on all the attention he received. Ryland proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to help with feedings and changings and spending hours just holding his son and marveling at him. When spring came again, they returned to the mountain cabin with baby Thomas. Ryland had built a cradle during the winter months, and he set it up near their bed. Tessa worried at first about raising a baby in the wilderness, but Ryland assured her they would be fine. "People have been raising children in wild places since the beginning of time," he told her. "Thomas will grow up strong and healthy here, with clean air and good food and plenty of room to explore when he gets older." He was right. Thomas thrived in the mountains, growing chubby and strong. By the time they returned to Butte that fall, he was crawling and getting into everything. Lily was his devoted companion, always ready to play with him or fetch something he needed. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and cycles, summers in the mountains, winters in Butte. Tessa's quarterly distributions from the mine provided a steady income, and Ryland's trapping and odd jobs supplemented it well. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Thomas was 3 years old, Tessa gave birth to twin daughters whom they named Sarah and Emma. Ryland was beside himself with joy, cradling his 2 tiny daughters and declaring them to be the most beautiful babies ever born. Thomas, now a sturdy toddler with his father's broad build and his mother's coloring, was fascinated by his new sisters. Lily, now 19 and a beautiful young woman in her own right, helped Tessa care for the twins with practiced ease. She had learned so much from raising Thomas that she was comfortable with babies now. Several young men in Butte had started courting her, and Ryland and Tessa watched with amusement and a little sadness as she navigated this new phase of her life. By the time Thomas was 5 and the twins were 2, Lily had fallen in love with a young assayer named James Hartford. He was a good man, educated and kind, and he treated Lily with the respect and affection she deserved. When he asked for her hand in marriage, both Ryland and Tessa gave their blessing gladly. Lily's wedding was a grand affair by Butte standards, held in the spring of 1884. Tessa cried as she watched her little sister Mary, remembering all the years she had spent raising her and protecting her. Ryland stood beside his wife with his arm around her, knowing exactly what she was feeling. "She will be fine," he whispered to Tessa as they watched Lily dance with her new husband. "You raised her well. She is strong and smart and capable of anything." "I know," Tessa said, wiping her eyes. "I'm just going to miss her." "She's only moving to the other side of town," Ryland pointed out with a smile. "You will see her all the time." And they did. Lily remained close to her sister and brother-in-law, visiting often and doting on her nieces and nephew. A year after her marriage, she gave birth to a son of her own, and Tessa was there to help her through it, offering the same care and support Lily had given her with her own children. As the years went on, the Dalton family continued to grow and thrive. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Sarah and Emma were inseparable, two halves of a whole, with their mother's beauty and their father's strength. Tessa and Ryland added two more children to their family, another son named James and a daughter named Grace. Through it all, Ryland and Tessa's love for each other only deepened. They had built a life together from almost nothing, starting with a chance encounter in the wilderness and growing into something beautiful and lasting. Ryland never forgot the image of Tessa breaking that piece of hardtack, giving the larger portion to her sister, even though she was starving. It had shown him the true measure of her character, and he thanked God every day that he had been there to see it. They split their time between the mountains and Butte for many years, but as they grew older and their children started families of their own, they spent more and more time at the mountain cabin. It was where their hearts had always been, where they had fallen in love, where they had built their life together. On a warm evening in late summer, when Ryland was 58 and Tessa was 53, they sat together on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard below, their laughter echoing through the valley. Thomas was there with his wife and 3 children. Sarah and Emma had both married and had families of their own. James was courting a girl from town, and Grace was still young, only 15, but already showing signs of the beauty and strength she had inherited from her mother. "Do you ever regret it?" Ryland asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Marrying me, I mean. Choosing this life instead of something easier?" Tessa turned to look at him, her green eyes still as clear and beautiful as they had been the day he first saw her. Her auburn hair was streaked with gray now, and there were lines on her face, but to Ryland, she was as lovely as ever. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "You saved my life, Ryland. You and Lily, we had nothing, and you gave us everything. But more than that, you gave me love. Real, true, lasting love. How could I ever regret that?" "I'm the one who should be thanking you," Ryland said, taking her hand. "I was alone in these mountains, thinking I was content with my solitary life. Then you came along and showed me what I had been missing. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be grateful for every day." "We saved each other," Tessa said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves and makes us better than we could ever be alone." They sat there together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. The air was filled with the sounds of their family children laughing, voices calling, the whole beautiful chaos of a life well lived. Ryland thought back to that day in the mountains when he had first seen Tessa, when she had been breaking a piece of hardtack to share with her sister, when she had been at her lowest point. He thought about how he had decided to help, never knowing that decision would change his entire life. He had fed them both that day, made sure they had plenty. But in doing so, Tessa had filled something in him too, a hunger he had not even known he had, a hunger for love, for family, for connection. She had fed his soul just as surely as he had fed her body, and together they had built something that would last long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren would carry on their legacy, would tell the story of the mountain man who found 2 starving women in the wilderness and gave them everything he had. They would speak of the love that had grown from that first act of kindness, and how it had created a family that stretched across 2 generations and would continue for generations to come. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ryland pulled Tessa closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. She sighed contentedly and snuggled against him, and they sat there together in perfect peace, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a beautiful life together. Below them, their daughter Grace called out that supper was ready. The family began to gather, heading into the cabin where a feast had been prepared, but Ryland and Tessa remained on the porch for just a moment longer, savoring the quiet before the joyful chaos of a family meal. "I love you," Ryland said, as he had said countless times over the years. "I love you too," Tessa replied, as she always did, "now and always." They stood together, still holding hands, and walked into the cabin to join their family. The table was laden with food venison stew, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and pies made from wild berries. Everyone took their places, the children chattering excitedly while the adults smiled indulgently. Ryland stood at the head of the table and called for quiet. When everyone had settled, he looked around at all the faces, his children, his grandchildren, his sister-in-law Lily, and her family who had ridden up from town for the gathering. His heart swelled with gratitude for every person in that room. "Before we eat, I want to say something," Ryland began. 30 years ago, I was alone in these mountains, and I thought that was enough. Then I found Tessa and Lily, and my whole world changed. Everything good in my life came from that one moment when I decided to help two strangers in need. So I want you all to remember this. Kindness matters. When you see someone who needs help, you help them. You never know what might come of it." He looked at Tessa, who had tears in her eyes, and smiled. You never know when a simple act of feeding someone might lead to a lifetime of love. "Here, here," Thomas called out, raising his glass, and everyone else followed suit. They ate and laughed and told stories late into the night. The children eventually fell asleep on the fur rugs in front of the fireplace, and the adults talked quietly, sharing news and memories. It was the kind of night that Ryland had once thought impossible for someone like him, surrounded by love and family and joy. As the years continued to pass, Ryland and Tessa grew old together in the mountains they loved. Their children visited often, bringing their own children and eventually their grandchildren. The cabin was expanded several more times to accommodate everyone during the summer gatherings that became a family tradition. Ryland taught his grandsons how to trap and hunt, just as he had taught his sons. Tessa taught her granddaughters how to preserve food and tend the garden, just as she had taught her daughters. The knowledge and skills were passed down through the generations, ensuring that the family would always be able to survive and thrive in the wild places. When Ryland was 72, he finally decided to retire from trapping. His body, though still strong, was not what it had been in his youth. He spent his days tending the garden, repairing things around the cabin, and playing with his great-grandchildren when they visited. Tessa continued to receive distributions from the Silver Star mine, which had remained profitable throughout all these years. The money provided a comfortable cushion for their retirement and allowed them to help their children and grandchildren when needed. She had proved to be a shrewd business partner, and the other mine owners had grown to respect her opinions and judgment. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the mountain cabin for a celebration. There were over 30 people, present children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and in-laws. The cabin and the surrounding area were filled with tents and temporary shelters to house everyone. A huge feast was prepared, with everyone contributing something. There was music and dancing, and Ryland even played his harmonica while his great-grandchildren clapped along. Tessa, now 65 but still beautiful to him, danced with Ryland under the stars just as they had on their wedding night 40 years before. 40 years, Tessa marveled as they swayed together. Can you believe it has been 40 years? Best 40 years of my life, Ryland said, pulling her closer, and I hope we have many more. They did have more years together, another 12 of them. Years filled with love and laughter, with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with sunrises over the mountains and quiet evenings on the porch. Years of contentment and peace, of knowing they had built something that would outlast them both. Ryland passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, with Tessa lying beside him. He simply did not wake up one morning, having lived a long, full life and given everything he had to the people he loved. Tessa mourned him deeply, but she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, who rallied around her with the same love and devotion Ryland had shown her all those years ago. She lived for another 5 years after his death, spending her final years at the mountain cabin, surrounded by family and memories. When Tessa died at the age of 82, she was buried next to Ryland in a small plot overlooking their valley. Their children placed a simple stone marker that read, "Ryland and Tessa Dalton." He fed them when they were hungry. She loved him with all her heart. Together they built a family that will endure forever. Their children and grandchildren continued to gather at the cabin every summer, keeping the tradition alive. The story of how Ryland had found Tessa and Lily in the wilderness, how he had seen Tessa feeding her meager supper to her sister and had made sure they both had plenty, became a family legend told to each new generation. Thomas, now an old man himself, often told the story to his great-grandchildren. "Your great-grandfather was the strongest, kindest man I ever knew," he would say. "He taught me that real strength is not just in your muscles, but in your heart. When he saw your great-grandmother and her sister in need, he did not hesitate. He fed them both, made sure they had plenty, and in doing so, he found the love of his life." The Silver Star mine eventually closed in the early 1900s after the silver veins were exhausted. But by then, the Dalton family was well established and thriving, with members spread across Montana and beyond. They had ranches, businesses, and families of their own, all stemming from that one moment of kindness in the wilderness. The mountain cabin still stands today, maintained by the family as a reminder of where they came from. Every summer, descendants of Ryland and Tessa gather there to celebrate their legacy. They tell the old stories, teach the old skills, and remember the mountain man who saw a woman feeding her supper to her sister and decided to help. It is a story of love born from hardship, of strength found in kindness, of two people who found each other at the right moment and built something beautiful together. It is the story of how one act of generosity feeding two hungry women and making sure they had plenty changed not just their lives, but the lives of countless others who came after them. And in those mountains of Montana where the aspens still turn gold in autumn and the creeks still run cold and clear, the spirit of that love endures. In every act of kindness, in every family meal shared with gratitude, in every moment when someone chooses to help another person in need, the legacy of Ryland and Tessa Dalton lives on. Their love story began with hunger and ended with abundance not just of food, but of love, family, and joy. It proved that sometimes the most extraordinary lives begin with the simplest acts of human decency, and that love, when it is real and true, can transform everything it touches. The mountain man had seen her feeding her supper to her sister, and he had fed them both and made sure they had plenty. In doing so, he had found his home, his heart, and his forever. And that, as their descendants still say to this day, is the greatest treasure any person can find.